Welcome again. This is the Level Up podcast, and Level Up was developed to facilitate challenging, real, and raw conversations with minorities about their unique experiences in the workforce. And today we have with us Chase McCants. Chase is sitting on the couch with us today. Super excited to have Chase here. He's going to tell us a little bit about himself and some of the really cool things that they got going on in Beam. What's going on, Chase?
Not much. Like everybody else, sitting in my, or I should say, standing in my office/bedroom, where I now work and do everything. But yeah, all good stuff over here. How about you?
Man, I'm doing well. I'm super excited to be able to sit here and speak to you. It's been really been waiting for this day for the last couple of weeks. Super interested to hear some of the things that you're gonna share with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your backstory and what led you to your career path to Beam?
Yeah, so I'll do the try for a short version. I went to school for journalism, write for newspapers, and this is back in the day. This is and you and I both know no one reads newspapers anymore, and so that started while I was in college, and I kind of saw the writing on the wall. During that time, I got super into music, hence the facial to band. Thought that was going to be the rest of my life, like most. But once I graduated, I had to find a job, and so I got into sales. Sold cell phones for about 4 years. Didn't enjoy sales, but really loved communicating. Can make life easier as long as you're just not afraid to learn. And so I found myself drawn towards training and teaching people about technology. My startup career started with there's a cool story there involving my wisdom to not having insurance, and that's kind of cool because I work for a dental insurance company now. But I started there with customer service, a small startup. We exist in a room. There were probably about 12 of us, and that I think that passion for training, explaining, my coworkers could hear it because we were all in the same room. And so I was promoted to an account manager. Didn't know what the hell that was, but I tried my best. I did one training on something called electronic prior authorization. And they said, Chase, you should just do more training. And so I saw them, slowly but surely, my account manager duties went away, and they started giving me people to train. And so I was the company trainer there for quite a long time. I think it was about 5 years altogether. And Cover My Meds grew pretty big. It got rather large. I think when I left, there was about 800 or 900 employees. And what I wanted to do was see, I often say I grew up with Cover My Meds. It was my home for a really long time. It was a great place to work. But I also missed those days when we were a lot smaller. Because people who work in startups, they know this. When a startup is small, it's just a wild west, and there are a ton of things that you can do and tons of experiences. And so when I was introduced to Fro, our Beam CEO, and he talked to me about the head of talent position, it was exciting because it involved things that I knew pretty well. Things that I had done, even though it wasn't part of my jobs, and stuff that I had never done before. And so they hired me. And that was back in 2018, and I was the head of talent for about a year and a half-ish, and then transitioned to this new role, which is the head of employee experience, and that's what I'm currently sitting in today.
So let's talk about that. Like, what does a head of employee experience actually do? You hear chief human resources officers and things of that nature, and I would kind of hold you in that same vein.
Yeah.
But it kind of explain to me, like, what does a head of employee experience do?
I don't know. No, I know, but it's a role that you rarely see at startups, but I'm starting to see it more often, not because of us, but I think because it's becoming more important, right? So you have those classic HR functions, and usually your HR manager is going to take care of that. You've also got talent acquisition, which is bringing folks into the organization. Mm-hmm. But something that keeps people at an organization is development and happiness. And usually we care about those things in a segmented way, right? We get amazing managers who build hopefully good culture on their teams. And as an aggregate, we have lots of really, really great culture, but it's never owned by a single person.
Mm-hmm.
But as companies grow, they're finding, I think, you can sometimes have this uneven experience where some teams are just having the time of their lives while another team is struggling. And sometimes there's no single eye on that, because listen, HR is a full-time job. We have an HR manager who is super busy doing a ton of stuff. And there's this area where a person can role that involves employee happiness, development, whether that's doing the development themselves or organized organization is doing it. There's also something to engaging in the community. A lot of startups don't just want to exist in a bubble, and that's the exciting thing about working for a startup. Engage their community, whether it's in conversations like this, or I often think of it as a great way to bring in underrepresented groups. Hey, here's what a startup is. You can come and work for us and be successful and grow your career. So exposure in that way. And really, that's a lot of what I work on. And so, we just did a training series. This was Pride Month. And so we did a training series on before the Stonewall riots. The Stonewall riots themselves, which were primarily led by LGBTQ people of color, super relevant right now, and then the life after that. And then next week we're going to talk about gender, right? So engaging the team in that, professional development, just a bunch of different things, and it's exciting.
Let's stay right here just for a moment.
Sure.
Because I mean, you said a lot there. And some of the folks who viewing this right now could clearly see that you're not like the typical HR guy, right? Being of a diverse background, put any unique obstacles in your wake on your road to success. Being a Black male and also a Black gay male, and not necessarily traditionally what you would think is clean cut corporate. How has that impact your role to becoming this head of employees at a really cool company?
That's tough. So yeah, in my days of retail, and I think there are a lot of stories, it was very obvious that I was treated different than my white colleagues. A really, really great story was exposure to people who worked at Apple. So I was a salesperson at Apple. We didn't work on commission or anything like that, but I was the guy you would see at the very front of the store. And so my job, you walk in and say, hey, I'm Chase. How can I help you, right? Apple is really awesome in that the only thing you have to wear is their boots and a lanyard, but everything else you can wear whatever you want. So this was the first time that I was wearing all my facial piercings in, didn't have to cover up my tattoos. My coworkers, who were often positioned behind me, same role, it was just I was up front, would see people, walk, greet them, say, what can I help you with? They would say nothing. They walk right behind me and go ask one of my white coworkers to help them out. Now, my white coworkers were awesome. They would those people right back up to the front and say, have you met Chase? And I would end up helping those people regardless. But it woke them up to something that Black people and people of color experience every single day. There are other stories that happen at both Sprint and AT&T. This is without the facial piercings, without my tattoos, because I had to cover those up. Right now, if people can see me, I have very long dreadlocks. Back then, my hair was really, really short, where I was threatened in a way that other employees weren't. I remember one time a guy said he was, can we curse on this? We all adults?
Sure, dude, go for it.
But he basically said he'll bash my fucking head in if I looked at him a certain way. Wow. As soon as an employee who was not a person of color walked out, it was a completely different conversation. And so that so much that my goal, outstanding, but a big support of that was just not having to the general public anymore, because there was such entity to me when all I was trying to do was make a living for myself. When I finally got, it was the time that I was not being judged based on how I looked. I was given opportunities and put in front of, I don't want to say showcase people,
Mm-hmm.
but, I was given these chances I've never had before in my career. Because instead of judging based on how I looked necessarily, I was being judged based on the quality of my work, which was a brand new thing
You
for me.
know, and
I felt,
I see, and I
go
don't
ahead.
mean to cut you off, but I definitely seen how the Supreme Court ruled on um, just earlier this week. I believe it was Monday. The workers can't be fired for being gay, his gender, and it was a really big blockbuster win for the LGBT community. And it's interesting because you find yourself in like that crossword, that cross a space where you're not only a black man, but you're
Yeah.
also a gay male, and that comes with a whole another side of just discriminances that a lot of folks don't necessarily get to see. What was your response to that ruling on the Supreme Court, and how has that empowered you to do the work that you're already
Finally, that was response.
doing?
Here's the thing that people don't often think about. We see pride celebrations and we think that everything is okay, but the reality is, the gay community is not just gay men and lesbian women and bisexual men and women. You've got a slew of other people. You've got trans folks, people who are non-binary, folks who are trans. I mean, think of I remember when I was in high school, there was a my ROTC class, where he was dressed normally, and then one day I remember he wore long, obviously fake nails, but fake nails to school.
Hmm.
And people's reaction to that, it wasn't hostile, at least from what I could see, but he got stares just all day long,
What could be
right?
worse?
So yeah, so I don't know what happened to him outside of that class because it was pretty strict, right? But
Mm.
imagine doing that as an adult, right? You discover, or you're realizing, or for once you are comfortable with crossing that line and saying, I am going to dress in a way that makes me feel appropriate, and you're doing that at work. It used to be completely fine in some states that, okay, now, employee, you are being a distraction and we're going to find a way to get rid of you. Now
Mm.
those people are protected. It doesn't blow my mind, but there is this thought that once marriage equality, was the lay of the land, that, oh, all our work here is done. It reminds me a lot when Obama got elected president. It was like, well, racism is over, right? But we don't look at the groups who are still affected, or the groups who are still not protected by law. And so finally, we've done something about that. I wish it would have come through legislation. I think that should have been the thing that happened. Congress should have passed that,
Hmm.
but it's a win nonetheless. I'm extremely excited about it.
So, and you made a really good point in terms of like, um, pretty much everything that you said just then. I really agree with all of that, especially the point that you made about Congress should have passed it, and they should have probably did this maybe decades ago. But as we're in this, I guess, new resurgence of this civil rights movement, and we're continuing to begin have these tough conversations at work, not only around gender and sexual orientation, but around race now and privilege. And historically, we're not necessarily used to having those conversations, even outside of the work context. How have you um, began to navigate these conversations or even facilitate them from your space?
So I will say this has probably been the hardest few weeks of my life in terms of dealing with this. I will be fully transparent. My mom, as I was growing up, warned me about, racism and, my interactions with police. And I wanted so desperately, probably until, I was in my mid 20s. I'm 35 now, but I wanted so desperately to say, to say to my mom, you're wrong. America is changing in a way that you need to get, you need to get up on. We ain't dealing with the problems from the 60s that you did, right? And I was so wrong about that. I saw it first time when Barack Obama was elected president, and we saw these overt racist caricatures, comics, speech about him, right? And so the last few weeks have been tough because I've told a lot of people, we as a Black community are going through mourning, right? We had our all hands meeting when some of the protests first started, and we had just gotten the gentleman in New York who, had the police called on him after telling someone to police. We had these two murders of Black people. These are people from our community, and I constantly explain it. We are mourning the loss of those people, but we're also thinking about ourselves, right? These folks aren't doing anything wrong. I cycle all the time, and I'm terrified that someone is going to see me out wearing, riding shorts. I'm wearing those compression shorts when I'm riding, like that someone will get the wrong impression of what my intentions are, which is simply to exercise, right? And so even though we're mourning, and that's tough, after our all hands meeting, I went to my bed and cried, and hyperbole, it hurt. But then there's also this fear that I could be next, or a family member could be next, right? And so to do that, and then have to figure out how to also communicate to people who are just waking up to this existence, it's taxing, you know? The word that we've been spinning around, especially as Black folks in the professional world, is that it's been exhausting. Because on one hand, we're trying to mourn, we're trying to go through this emotional trauma, but then we're also trying to continue to educate on the reality that we've lived in for well over hundreds of years. And it's really tough to do those two things at the same time. But regardless of that, what I did was I spoke about it at our all hands meeting just briefly because we were experiencing it, and then we do something called This Week at Beam Dental. It's just it's a company stand up, and so I talked about it then, and then later that week we had a open discussion, an open forum with our team, and so a lot of people, our employees of color, spoke up about their experiences. Their experience in terms of race in America. We had some of our white employees say what they have observed, some of their misconceptions, things like that. We did two of those discussions, and it was, I think it was great. There were stories that were told, things that had never happened to me but happened to my colleagues. There was on those calls, but I think there was also a lot of understanding. And so, as much as this has been exhausting and tiring, I feel optimistic, and I don't want to say that because every single time I feel optimistic, there's something that lurches it back, but this feels different. Those conversations that we had as an organization, they're happening in a broader context, and it feels like people are listening, and it feels like there's legislation going through to pass it. Companies are thinking about diversity in their organization, not only on the lower levels, but also diversity in their middle management, in their leadership, right? That stuff is important. We are calling out the fact that, with some organizations, the only people of color are the VPs of diversity and inclusion, right? What about your, so I love that we are finally addressing this, because it has to be talked about. It can't just be like the thing that's trending. Our lives,
and we all have like
it.
this responsibility, right? To shoot hard and shoot straight, and to be knowledgeable about the impact that we want to make, from an organizational, from a community perspective, as it relates to generations to come, in our families and from in our friend group. These are the conversations that are super tough to have, but I'm glad also that we are starting to have these conversations, and at least what I call like the level one of these conversations. But as we really start to get in the conversations around allyship, um, uh, especially as it relates to our white leaders in these organizations, that may have mentees that they've been quite them, to try to get them geared up for leadership roles. Are they going to be willing to say not right now to give a Black or a Latino or another, individual a swing at the bat, so to
Yeah.
speak. That's the hardest conversation to have, because these are the guys, these are the mentees that they built relationships with. They go to golf, and even more than that, they know each other's families. And, this is more of a family mentee mentor relationships in most cases. So I guess coming off of that, as we start to fill out the situation day by day, um, how are you out uh, continuing to be creative and adaptable to maintain the momentum of these conversations, as we start to know that the NBA is coming back and the NFL is coming back, and this thing to be glossed over,
Yeah.
especially in organizations. What mindset are you now, frame of focus, in terms of continuing to move the conversation into action?
I'm a old emo punk kid, hence the black clothing. For me, oh man, I just don't give a fuck anymore. And I know I apologize for cursing, but it's like at a certain point you have to be unapologetic about the things that you bring up. Luckily, Beam is an organization that is, I don't have to say I don't give a fuck. I'm going to say this whether you like it or not. The organization has always been one that for staff, as far as background experience and all those things, right? And so since the time I came in, my goal was to make sure that Beam was already pretty diverse. My goal was to keep it that way. And so that means not only interviewing people who come to us organically, but going out in the community and saying work for Beam Dental, finding those folks on LinkedIn and putting them at the top of our funnel to make sure that the top of the funnel is diverse, right? Taking our team, this wasn't me, but we brought someone in to take our team through anti-bias training, right? So that we can identify the ways that we are biased. We are probably up for another one of those. But then we found recruiters who are also passionate about this, about creating a diverse workforce. I think we did a pretty good job of starting that. This year's focus is making sure that we have that we're inclusive, right? So I'm stealing this quote from Lacey. She works at We Can Code It, I do believe. So she did a talk on DEI at a space that I was just an audience attendant. I did a talk on imposter syndrome, and she said this really awesome thing. She said, diversity meaning that everyone is invited to dinner. And then inclusion means that everyone has something to eat. So my focus this year was making sure that everyone had something to eat. COVID-19 threw us for a little bit of a loop, but that work continues. And so you've got myself, you've got our office manager, Steph Livingston, who's really passionate about wellness, but also diversity. We've got our two recruiters. We want to make sure that not only are folks being invited to dinner, but they've got a place to eat. We've still got a lot of work to do on that. That's a 2020 initiative. But I think we're heading in the right direction. We're also continuing this education part of it, right? People have to know of their biases. They need to know where they fall short, and it's okay. It's not, it's recognizing it is the most important part. That's how we move forward in understanding how those biases can affect the work space. And so, we're trying to uncover that with our organization on all levels, because we usually have our employees in the interview process itself. This is all a goal to be more perfect. We will never be perfect. No organization is going to be perfect at this, but we aim to be as close to perfect as we can. And every day that we work towards it is a day that we will be more perfect.
You said a whole lot there. I had a whole lot of questions that I wanted to ask you, and you pretty much summed it up. I guess, what advice would you give to companies that want to begin to make the change necessary to be more inclusive in their workspaces, but don't necessarily have historically not necessarily had the umbrella to do some of that stuff?
Yeah.
And I'm speaking more towards the individuals in those organizations that are in those seats, What advice would you give
So
to them?
first off, this stuff feels like a mountain. Do not let it scare you. Every single DEI initiative, every single thought towards diversity starts somewhere, and it doesn't have to start big. It just needs to start. And it doesn't have to start with senior leadership, although it should. It should start with senior leadership. It doesn't have to. I'm going to use Cover My Meds as an example for this. I think there's an employee over there who was on their support team who was just passionate about DEI initiatives. So he started just doing it. I don't know the guy. I just hear stories about him, right? That's a customer service person in a company that's well over 1,000 people, right? So if you're thinking about starting some, if you are in the position like a senior leader, go and educate yourself, just the basics of all this. YouTube is a great place to learn stuff, right? And I will say this, it sounds easy. Go to YouTube, go read some articles. You are taking a step that thousands of other leaders are not taking right now. So take it and learn something from it. Learn how you can program that back into your organization. Create a diverse workforce so it doesn't fall to a single minority to educate everyone. In fact, this doesn't have to be owned by a minority, although it's good to hear the perspective, right? Do some research on your own and maybe present it to your team. Bring in outside folks if you feel like you're not equipped with it. I always say, start creating a diverse workforce. A lot of companies are starting to pick up on hiring again, right? It doesn't mean that you fast track someone who is a person of color to the finish line. It means diversifying line so that they have a high likelihood of getting to the bottom of your pipeline. Analyze your interview process and ask yourself, is there a way that I could be discriminating unintentionally against anyone, right? Do I have my own biases that are getting in the way of me hiring someone of color? I think there are a lot of stuff that you can do in the first part to get your team itself more diverse as time goes on. And then you get to worry about the fun stuff, which is how do we keep those people in our organization? How do we make sure that they have something to eat at dinner? But I think starting off with educating yourself, diversifying your pipeline, and that's going to take work. It doesn't mean that you get to post a job and then you just wait for people to come in. Hell, it doesn't even mean that you get to use LinkedIn to recruit just minorities. You have to go to where people are. That might mean speaking at a panel at a library with random folks from the community.
Or at
It might
HBCU.
HBCU, right? It might mean there's some really great tech organizations. You've got Black Tech, Black Hack. There's so many opportunities where you can present yourself no matter what color you are. You could be a white dude, a white straight dude. Go to these places and say, we want you to work at our organization, not just because you're Black, but because of talent and perspective that we use to make our company amazing. But you have to take those steps because those people may not come to you. And I know I'm ranting a little bit, or at least talking a lot.
No, you're fine.
But we have to remember that not everyone knows what a startup is. When I started at Cover My Meds, thought it was a small company. To introduce your organization to that community so that they know who you are. The second thing is Black folks or people of color in general tend to be, I know I would feel super uncomfortable going to a company of mostly white people, right? Because there are things that can come from that if those folks are not learned about what it means to interact with Black folks or people of color. And I've heard a ton of stories of comments that white coworkers make that they don't mean to be offensive, but oh my God, they are offensive, right? That means going out into those communities and communicating like, my organization is different, and how, let me tell you how you will be welcomed into our organization, right? It's getting exposure, it's educating, it's making people feel comfortable with being through your interview process. I think those are amazing first steps. And then we can start the second thing, which is of course the inclusion part.
That's well spoken, man. I guess if you have a call to action, uh, from Beam's perspective, to companies that are um, thinking about making the strides and there are in the process of making the strides, what would that call to action be?
I would say amplify your voices in your organization. It's time that we had conversations with. It would strike me as odd if an organization had an all white staff, right? Start listening to those employees. I think it's really time. There are things that you may not know are going on in your organization. Start talking to those employees. They need to understand that you care about them, and they need their voices heard. Um, Start hiring people of color. It's not just a quota, it's getting a diverse perspective. A lot of companies that I found that make missteps in their marketing or their approach simply because there's no one in the room that looks like the person that they're about to offend. So, of having that voice in the room and part of the decision. Again, that can come from the coworker that's already there, but I think it also starts with recruiting. Diversify your pipeline, diversify your pipeline, diversify your pipeline. You mentioned before about people who mentor young folks who look like them. Diversify your pipeline. Go mentor people who don't look
Mhm.
like you. They would love that. They're not going to be like, who the fuck are you, right? They would welcome that. There was this great video. I think I've seen it like a billion times, right? But it's the one where there's these kids start off all, if you've grown up with two parents in your household,
On
take
the
two
field.
steps forward. And yeah, so we've seen that. But what I love about it is that it first exposes exactly what privilege is. But there is this commandment at the very end where he says, now that you've won this money, I think it was, what are you going to do to make sure that no one else has that far back, right? It's another similar conversation that, oh my God, I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, but he went on the Tonight Show, and it's obvious that there are no people of color in any, except for Trevor Noah, in any of these shows, right? And so the host switched places with the gentleman there, and said he had to the effect of what would you like to know from a white guy, right? So the person of color is sitting in the host seat. They switched, and he said, "Okay, my question is, what are you, now that you understand what privilege is? What are you going to do to help someone else who isn't born with the same privilege as you?" And I think that is an amazing question to ask. I'm not saying that anyone should feel bad for their privilege. You're born into it. You don't get a say on where you're born into.
Hmm.
The thing is, what are you going to do to help other people who are not born into that same privilege? If you're an executive, if you are a manager, think about who you're mentoring. Think about who could really use your mentorship. Think about what doors you can open for them that were not available to them to others. They still have to fight for their spot. They can't just succeed because of their skin color, but you can give them a heads up that they wouldn't otherwise. I think that's a good start.
That's a great point, because since the protest and everything, I've been seeing an outpouring of white Americans, and more of them are saying, "We're here for you. What can we do?" One of the things that I would add to that is to just employ to be more discriminative about the kind they're having around race and privilege with their friends and their families, because those are the conversations need to be around how we will all move forward. The problems we're addressing are not new. Um, and they certainly don't have easy solutions. We all need to be dedicated to fighting for real change, and lasting change at that. So I guess to my white peers, I generally say to them, when they ask me that, I can't help you manage your gift, but I help you to be responsible for how we are going to move forward in perpetuity. And I think you hit the nail right on the head with that. So I think it's great for me, a good opportunity for me to put a pin in it right here, because I think that was a great wrap for you conversation. It's really exciting, and I'm really happy to hear that all of the good things that Beam is doing, and the soul that being had towards DNI, and not just trying to, check off the box and make sure that they have all the colors that work there, but stated making sure that everyone at the dinner party has something to eat also.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you. Those fantastic insights. We greatly appreciate the time that you spent sitting on the virtual couch with us here at Level Up Podcast. But and for all of the viewers, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. We're able to get a lot of value out of this. It's amazing, as you can tell. Thank you for tuning in once again. Until next time, leave a comment, like, subscribe to the channel, smash that share button, hashtag level up, and we're out.